A strange light has been seen in the sky before every great human disaster. For more than 1,500 years, across plagues and wars and collapses, the same celestial visitor seems to return. This is the legend of the Ghost Comet, a wandering star that appears only when our world is in crisis. By the end of this, you will hold the complete story, from ancient chronicles to our modern pandemic, and decide for yourself if the universe is sending us a warning. Why would a single comet mark our moments of greatest suffering, and what does its next appearance mean for our future? Have you ever looked at the stars and felt a deep, inexplicable sense of connection to history? The story begins in a world plunged into a deep, unnatural twilight. In the year 536, across continents, people looked up and saw a sun that gave no warmth, a sky the color of tarnished brass. For 18 long months, a mysterious dust veil choked the atmosphere, dimming daylight and dropping temperatures across the globe. This was the beginning of the worst decade to be alive in recorded history. And during this perpetual gloom, chroniclers from the Byzantine Empire to the courts of China recorded something else in the heavens. They wrote of a faint, ghostly star with a pale, ragged tail, a visitor that did not blaze brightly but lingered ominously for months on end. This was not a spectacular shooting star, but a dim, persistent smudge against the already darkened sky. The Roman historian Procopius described it as a star of dire portent, while Chinese astronomers meticulously noted its slow, mournful path. This dim light was the first clear, multicultural sighting of what we now call the Ghost Comet. Beneath that cold, comet-lit sky, the world unraveled. Crops failed from Ireland to Mesopotamia as frost struck in midsummer. The great city of Constantinople, capital of the Byzantine Empire, faced bread riots as grain shipments vanished. Famine spread like a shadow, weakening populations from Europe to Asia. Then, from the ports of Egypt came the rats. The plague of Justinian arrived, a terrifying pandemic of bubonic plague that would eventually kill tens of millions, perhaps half the population of the Mediterranean world. Societies already stressed by hunger and cold shattered under this biological onslaught. Historians now believe the climatic disaster was triggered by a cataclysmic volcanic eruption, likely in Iceland or North America, which filled the stratosphere with sun-blocking ash and sulfate aerosols. The comet, then, appeared not as the cause but as a silent witness to the catastrophe. Its timing was impossibly precise. It arrived as the sky itself seemed to die, and it lingered through the famine and the initial waves of plague. This single event, the year without a summer, established the terrifying template, a global crisis of unimaginable scale, and in the sky above it all, that same faint, wandering light. The pattern was set not by one culture's superstition, but by the united testimony of a suffering world. Nearly 800 years passed and humanity rebuilt. Empires rose and fell, technologies advanced, and the memory of that ancient, starless summer faded into myth. Then, in the autumn of 1347, a new star with a long, misty tail appeared in the constellation of Pisces. European monks, Arab astronomers, and Korean stargazers all recorded it, calling it a hairy star, a sign written in the heavens. To the medieval mind, the cosmos was a living book of divine messages. Comets were not random balls of ice, they were celestial messengers, and a hairy star was the most ominous script of all. It signaled God's displeasure, a warning of coming wrath, a direct portent of doom. The air itself seemed to thicken with dread as people watched the silent visitor grow brighter. Then, almost as if summoned by the comet's light, the ships arrived. At the port of Messina in Sicily, Geno's trading vessels drifted into harbor with most of the crew already dead or dying, their bodies covered in grotesque black swellings. The Black Death had come to Europe. The timing was once again a chilling coincidence. The comet of 1347 blazed in the sky during the very months the plague was spreading from the steppes of Asia along the Silk Road and onto those fateful merchant ships. By the time the comet faded from view, the pandemic was unstoppable, a tidal wave of death that would wipe out an estimated 1/3 of Europe's population within just a few years. Society's very foundations cracked, faith was tested as prayers went unanswered, labor shortages gave peasants new power, and the old feudal order began to crumble. The Ghost Comet had reappeared, and its message, interpreted through the lens of absolute faith, seemed horrifically clear. It was not merely a witness this time. In the eyes of those who saw it, it was the herald. The pattern was no longer a one-time tragedy from a dark age. It was a repeating signal, a celestial marker for humanity's deepest wounds. The sky over the New World held a different kind of omen. As the 15th century drew to a close, European astronomers scanning the heavens for guidance and Spanish priests documenting the beliefs of the peoples they sought to convert, both recorded a strange, smoky star in the night sky around the year 1492. In Mesoamerica, the Aztec Codex writers, masters of celestial observation, may have seen this same visitor and interpreted it through their own complex cosmology, where such signs were woven into the fabric of fate. Its appearance was a whisper in two worlds, a single celestial event about to be fractured into two utterly different realities. For the kingdoms of Europe, the year 1492 was a horizon exploding with possibility. It was the end of the Reconquista in Spain, a final victory, and the launch of Christopher Columbus's daring voyage across the Atlantic, a mission fueled by ambition and a quest for new trade routes. The comet, if noted in a ship's log, might have been seen as a beacon of divine favor, a light guiding the way to glory and gold. But on the other side of the ocean, that same faint light was shining down on a civilization on the brink of an unimaginable crisis. For the Taino people of the Caribbean, the Aztec Empire, the Inca civilization, and countless other indigenous nations, the arrival of European ships was not discovery, it was apocalypse. What followed was a catastrophe of such scale it reshaped the planet's biology and human geography. Waves of foreign diseases like smallpox, against which the Americas had no immunity, swept ahead of the conquistadors, killing perhaps 90% of the population in a demographic collapse so severe it cooled the global climate. Societies, cities, and entire knowledge systems were erased. This was not a localized plague or a single war, it was the end of a world. So, did the Ghost Comet mark a glorious age of exploration or a genocide? The terrifying answer suggested by the pattern is that it marks the crisis itself regardless of perspective. It appeared at the precise pivot point when two halves of humanity, separated for millennia, collided. The consequence was a singular, global human tragedy of disease, conquest, and cultural annihilation. The comet does not judge, it merely appears. And in 1492, it witnessed the opening act of a crisis that would define the modern age, leaving us with a haunting question. Does it mark the moment of collision, or the moment the first foreign virus took root on a new shore? The 17th century closed its London chapter with two horrors, arriving one after the other like a single, devastating breath. In the spring of 1665, a familiar terror crept back into the city's crowded, filthy streets. The bubonic plague returned. It began in the poorer parishes, but by summer the death carts were rolling day and night, their drivers calling out, "Bring out your dead." The city descended into a silent panic as those who could afford it fled, leaving the rest to a grim quarantine marked by red crosses painted on doors. And in the midst of this unfolding nightmare, people looked up. Multiple accounts from that year describe a comet, a pale, streaking visitor in the night sky. To a population steeped in biblical imagery and living through what felt like the end of days, its meaning was unmistakable. This was the finger of God pointing directly at a sinful London. The plague peaked in the searing heat of August 1665, claiming nearly 7,000 lives in a single week. By the time the cold weather finally subdued the outbreak the following year, at least 100,000 Londoners were dead. The city was a hollowed-out shell, traumatized and reeking of death. And then, before it could even catch its breath, the second blow fell. In the early hours of September 2nd, 1666, a small fire started in a bakery on Pudding Lane. Fanned by a strong east wind and fed by the city's tightly packed wooden buildings, it exploded into an inferno. The Great Fire of London raged for 4 days, reducing 13,000 houses, 87 churches, and St. Paul's Cathedral to smouldering ash. In the aftermath, as Londoners sifted through the ruins of their city and their lives, the two events became fused in the public mind. They were not separate tragedies, but a single divine purge, and the comet was the proof. Artists memorializing the fire often included the celestial messenger in their works. One famous contemporary engraving shows the towering flames engulfing the city, while high above, a brilliant comet with a long, forked tail streaks across the sky, a clear symbol of wrath and warning. The message was clear: the plague was the judgment and the fire was the cleansing. The Ghost Comet was no longer just a historical curiosity from dusty chronicles. It was now a visceral part of Western folklore. Its appearance in 1665 was directly linked, in art and popular memory, to the most traumatic decade in London's history. The pattern held with terrifying precision, a celestial bookmark placed at the start of a profound human crisis. But if this was a divine signal, what kind of god would use the same symbol for a natural plague, a devastating fire, and the collapse of entire civilizations? The comet's meaning was becoming more ambiguous and more frightening with every return. The smoke over London had barely cleared when a new age of reason began to dawn. A century of enlightenment promised to sweep away old superstitions, replacing fear of the heavens with a cool, rational understanding. Astronomers turned their telescopes skyward not to read omens, but to map the mechanics of the cosmos. Yet the Ghost Comet, it seems, did not get the memo. As the late 1700s erupted in revolution, that familiar celestial signal returned not once but twice, blazing above the birth pangs of the modern world. In 1769, a brilliant comet streaked into view. It was meticulously tracked by the French astronomer Charles Messier, a man so dedicated to his search for new comets that he kept a list of fuzzy objects that were definitely not comets to avoid future confusion. To Messier, this great comet of 1769 was a scientific prize, a new data point in the clockwork universe. But on the other side of the Atlantic, in the rest of American colonies, that same blazing star was seen through a very different lens. Tensions with the British Crown were at a breaking point over taxes and representation. Pamphlets spoke of liberty, and whispers of independence grew louder. When a magnificent, unexpected comet appeared in the sky, many colonists saw it not as a ball of ice and dust, but as a divine endorsement of their cause, a heavenly flare marking the end of monarchical tyranny and the birth of a new republic. Just 6 years later, the first shots of the American Revolution were fired at Lexington and Concord. 20 years later, the pattern repeated with even more chilling symmetry. In the summer of 1789, another comet, likely the one we now call Comet in Care, became visible. Once again, astronomers recorded its orbit. And once again, a populace on the brink of historic upheaval looked up and saw a symbol. This time, the epicenter was Paris. France was bankrupt, seething with social inequality and boiling with revolutionary fervor. In July of that same year, 1789, a Parisian mob stormed the Bastille fortress, the iconic spark of the French Revolution. The comet had appeared in the months leading up to that explosion. To the peasants and the rising bourgeoisie, the blazing star was a clear sign that the old world of kings and aristocrats was about to be swept away. The very heavens, it seemed, were announcing revolution. This presented a profound contradiction. the Enlightenment had taught that comets were natural objects governed by predictable laws. Thinkers like Voltaire openly mocked the idea that they were divine portents. Yet here was the uncanny timing again, the Ghost Comet appearing as the pillars of the old order were being violently shaken. The populace, even in an age of reason, could not ignore the omen. The comets were no longer just harbingers of plague or natural disaster. They had become political symbols, celestial flags of rebellion. This shift is crucial. It suggests the comet does not mark a specific type of crisis, but a fundamental breaking point in human affairs. It witnessed the collapse of biological order with the plagues, and now it witnessed the collapse of political and social order. The message was not in the comet itself, but in the eyes of those who saw it, trembling with hope or fear beneath a sky that seemed to be writing their history in fire. If the universe was truly silent and mechanical, why did its timing feel so perfectly, terrifyingly scripted? By the time the 19th century reached its midpoint, the pattern had woven itself into the very fabric of human dread. The revolutions had settled, but the skies remained restless. In the autumn of 1843, a comet was recorded by observers in the southern hemisphere, a faint streak that would later be designated Great Comet of 1843. It was a brilliant object, visible even in daylight for some, a spectacle that captured the attention of astronomers worldwide. But its light would soon fall upon a landscape facing a very different kind of darkness. 2 years later, in the damp, cool September of 1845, farmers across Ireland noticed a peculiar rot on their potato plants. What should have been healthy green leaves turned black and withered, and the potatoes themselves, pulled from the ground, were a putrid, inedible mush. This was the arrival of Phytophthora infestans, a water mold we now call potato blight. The potato was not merely a crop in Ireland, it was the absolute foundation of life for millions of tenant farmers. Its failure was not a setback, it was an existential sentence. The famine that followed was a slow, grinding catastrophe of almost unimaginable scale. Year after year, the blight returned, while 1 million people starved to death and another 1 million boarded coffin ships in a desperate flight across the Atlantic. The land itself emptied out, in this atmosphere of profound despair where faith was both a solace and a torment. People searched the heavens for meaning. While no major, widely documented comet coincides exactly with the famine's brutal peak, the period was one of intense astronomical activity. The years surrounding the crisis saw several notable comets, including the Great Comet of 1843, and periodic visits from others like Comet Biela, which was closely watched after it spectacularly split in two. More importantly, the era's newspapers and diaries are filled with accounts of strange lights, atmospheric anomalies, and blood-red sunsets phenomena often caused by distant volcanic eruptions or dust in the air, but readily interpreted through a lens of suffering. For a devout, Gaelic-speaking population watching their children starve, any unusual sign in the sky could be woven into their narrative of anguish. Was this a punishment from God? A warning ignored, the very absence of a single, glaring comet in the record during the worst years makes the cultural interpretation even more poignant. The people were so conditioned by the old stories, so immersed in a worldview where celestial events mirrored earthly trials, that they may have seen portents in ordinary atmospheric effects. This adds a profound layer of tragedy to the astronomical record. The Ghost Comet pattern is not just about the literal reappearance of a specific icy body. It is about the human need to find a signal in the noise of catastrophe, to believe that even our suffering is part of a larger, if terrifying, design. The Irish famine was a complex disaster of political failure, economic exploitation, and biological chance. Yet for those living through it, the feeling was biblical. And when you are living a biblical plague, you cannot help but look for the pillar of fire in the sky, whether it is truly there or not. the line between a recorded comet and a remembered omen begins to blur, forcing us to ask, is the power of the Ghost Comet in its orbit, or in our desperate, human longing to read our fate in the stars? The sky over Siberia shattered on a summer morning. June 30th, 1908, began with a blinding blue-white light streaking across the heavens above the remote Tunguska River basin. Seconds later, a shockwave of unimaginable force flattened 80 million trees across 800 square miles of forest, radiating outward from a point high in the atmosphere. Windows shattered hundreds of miles away, and seismic stations across Europe and Asia registered what felt like a massive earthquake. For nights afterward, skies across Europe glowed so brightly that people could read newspapers at midnight, a phenomenon caused by ice crystals from the vaporized object still high in the stratosphere. This was the Tunguska event, the largest impact event in recorded human history. And while no one saw a traditional comet with a long tail in the sky that day, the leading scientific explanation points directly to our celestial visitor. It was almost certainly a small comet or stony asteroid, roughly 200 feet across, that exploded in an airburst 3 to 6 miles above the ground with the force of 10 to 15 megatons of TNT. The Ghost Comet, it seems, did not just appear in the sky in 1908. It arrived. This changes everything. For over a millennium, the pattern suggested the comet was a silent witness, a passive omen hanging in the heavens as crises unfolded below. Tunguska presents a terrifying new possibility. What if the comet is not just a marker but an active participant? The explosion was in one of the most sparsely populated places on Earth. If that same object had arrived just 4 hours later, the rotation of the Earth would have placed a major European city directly in its path. The resulting airburst over, say, London or Paris would not have been a natural disaster. It would have been an instantaneous, incomprehensible act of annihilation, a single event that could have killed millions, toppled governments, and plunged the world into political and economic chaos overnight. It would have been the ultimate global crisis, triggered not by plague or revolution, but by a direct impact from the cosmos itself. So was Tunguska the Ghost Comet fulfilling its role. In a twisted way, yes, but not in the way the old legends feared. It demonstrated the comet's raw, apocalyptic potential, a potential that, by the sheer luck of geography and timing, did not manifest as a human catastrophe. It was a warning shot, a physical demonstration of the destructive power these wandering bodies hold. The crisis was averted, not caused. This shifts the legend from pure folklore into a realm of genuine existential threat. The pattern of appearances alongside human suffering could be a cosmic coincidence, a trick of selective memory. But Tunguska is not a matter of interpretation. It is a craterless scar on the planet, a fact. It proves that objects from deep space can and do arrive without warning, with civilization-ending force. The Ghost Comet is no longer just a mysterious light, it is a tangible danger, and that raises a chilling question for the modern age. If it returned tomorrow, would we see it as an omen in the sky, or would we feel it as a fireball in our cities? Our next chapter would test that question, not with a blast, but with a different kind of shadow falling across the entire world. The 20th century brought a new kind of darkness, one lit by the flash of artillery and the glow of burning cities. As humanity plunged into the mechanized horror of total war, the old celestial patterns seemed to reassert themselves with a dreadful inevitability. The Great War began in the summer of 1914, a conflict so vast it was believed to be the war to end all wars. But 4 years earlier, in 1910, the most famous comet of all had already made its scheduled appearance. Halley's Comet swung past Earth, its tail stretching magnificently across the heavens. Yet this visit was shrouded in global panic, not wonder. Newspapers ran sensational stories warning that poisonous cyanogen gas in the comet's tail would asphyxiate all life on Earth. While scientists vehemently denied the claim, the public fear was real, a collective dread that the sky itself was turning against them. That fear did not dissipate with Halley's passing, it seeped into the cultural psyche. And when the guns of August began firing in 1914, many looked back and connected the dots. Halley's comet had been the warning flare, but was it the only one? Astronomical records show that in the months leading up to and during the first year of the war, other, fainter comets were indeed recorded by observatories. These were not the spectacular visitors of legend, but small, icy wanderers noted in the logs of dedicated astronomers. To a soldier in a muddy trench, however, any unusual light in the sky could take on a terrible significance. The war introduced destruction at an industrial scale with machine guns, poison gas, and tanks. In such a shattered world, the ancient idea of a comet as an omen felt strangely resonant again. It was as if the universe had sent its most famous messenger first, and then quieter companions to mark the descent into a new, mechanized abyss. That abyss would deepen just a generation later. In the tense months of late 1939, as Nazi Germany invaded Poland and plunged Europe back into war, another comet quietly entered the inner solar system. Discovered by an astronomer named John Cunningham, Comet Cunningham became visible to the naked eye in the spring of 1940, a faint, fuzzy star in the twilight sky. Its timing was once more impeccably ominous. This was the period of the phony war, a strange, anxious lull before the blitzkrieg erupted across Western Europe. For civilians and soldiers alike, staring up at the night sky during blackouts, the comet was an unavoidable symbol. The psychological impact here is critical. During the unprecedented chaos of total war, where daily life was governed by air raid sirens, rationing, and the terror of invasion, people instinctively searched for meaning. The ancient, hardwired human habit of looking to the heavens for signs re-emerged with powerful force. A comet was no longer merely an astronomical object, it was a reflection of the global cataclysm below. For a Londoner huddled in a subway station during the Blitz, or a Polish refugee fleeing eastward, that pale streak of light could feel like a confirmation, a celestial marker for the unimaginable scale of the violence engulfing the world. It represented the feeling that this conflict was not just another war, but a fundamental rupture in human history, an event so massive it was written in the stars. The Ghost Comet, in the guise of these 20th century visitors, had evolved once more. It was no longer just a harbinger of plague or revolution. It had become the silent witness to humanity's newfound capacity for self-annihilation, a cold light shining down on battlefields that spanned continents and oceans. The pattern held, but the nature of the crisis had changed, forcing us to wonder if the comet was marking a progression, a shift from natural and political disasters to a new era where the greatest threat to humanity was unmistakably humanity itself. The shadow of nuclear war made the sky itself a source of dread. For decades, the world lived under the constant, unspoken fear that the next bright light on the horizon would not be a comet, but the flash of 1,000 suns. It was against this backdrop of existential anxiety that the Ghost Comet returned, not as a dim omen, but as a pair of brilliant scientific spectacles that could not escape their ominous timing. In April of 1957, as the Soviet Union had just launched the first artificial satellite, Sputnik, into orbit, a spectacular comet named Arend-Roland appeared. It was a stunning sight with a bright, fan-shaped tail and even a rare anti-tail, a spike of sunlight reflecting off dust that made it look like a celestial spear pointed at the Earth. Here was a comet in the age of rockets, photographed and tracked by observatories worldwide, a known quantity of ice and dust, yet its brilliance coincided precisely with the peak of Cold War panic. The space race had begun, proving missiles could reach the heavens and therefore every enemy city. The comet's dramatic, almost aggressive appearance felt like a cosmic mockery of human ingenuity, a natural wonder underscoring our unnatural capacity for self-destruction. Just 8 years later, in October of 1965, an even more incredible comet arrived. Secchi, one of the brightest comets of the millennium, raced past the sun so close it was visible in broad daylight. People could simply block the sun with their hand and see this magnificent fiery streak clinging to the star. Scientists were thrilled, calling it a member of the Creutzfeldt family of sun-grazing comets. But the public mood was different. This was 1965. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a fresh, traumatic memory. The Vietnam War was escalating into a bloody quagmire. The doomsday clock, a symbol of our proximity to nuclear midnight, was set to just 11 minutes to 12. In that climate, a daylight comet felt less like a marvel and more like a rehearsal. Its searing brightness evoked the blinding flash of a detonation. Its path, diving into the sun, suggested a fatalistic plunge. For the first time, humanity understood comets completely, yet could not shake the ancient feeling they brought. The fear had simply evolved from divine punishment to a mirror of our own man-made apocalypse. The comet was no longer a warning of plague or famine, but a silent, brilliant analog for the nuclear fireball we now held in our own hands. It was the Ghost Comet reflecting humanity's darkest possible future back at us, a future where the next great crisis would not come from the stars, but from our own silos and launch pads. But then the pattern seemed to break. The 1980s brought a new kind of plague, one that moved in silence and shadow before exploding into a global crisis of fear, stigma, and heartbreaking loss. The AIDS pandemic emerged, a devastating viral scourge that targeted the very immune system meant to protect us. It was a medical mystery, a social earthquake, and a tragedy that claimed millions of lives. By every measure, it was a profound human crisis, and yet the sky above remained strangely, conspicuously quiet. Where was the Ghost Comet? Where was the celestial herald for this modern nightmare? For the first time in the remembered legend, a great calamity unfolded without a brilliant, undeniable light in the heavens to mark its arrival. This silence from the cosmos is perhaps the most important clue of all. It forces a moment of stark skepticism. Astronomically, the period was not completely empty. Halley's Comet made its scheduled return in 1986, but its appearance was famously dim, a pale ghost of its former self, visible only with great effort from dark rural sites. For the vast majority of people living through the terror of the AIDS crisis, there was no magnificent comet blazing overhead, no obvious sign in the stars. This absence challenges the entire foundation of the legend. It asks us a difficult but necessary question: have we been seeing a pattern where none truly exists? Psychologists call this apophenia, the human tendency to perceive meaningful connections between unrelated things. We are storytelling creatures wired to find cause and effect. When we look back through history, it is terrifyingly easy to cherry-pick dates, to find a comet that roughly coincides with a disaster, and then weave a compelling narrative around it. We remember the hits and forget the misses. How many bright comets have streaked past in peaceful, prosperous years, their visits noted only in astronomy journals and quickly forgotten by popular culture? The likely answer is many. This celestial silence during the AIDS pandemic is a powerful argument for coincidence. It suggests the Ghost Comet is not a cosmic alarm bell, but a phantom of our own making, a story we tell to make the chaotic brutality of history feel ordered, even destined. Yet for some, the absence itself is suspicious. Could it be that we are simply looking for the wrong thing? The legend speaks of a singular, ominous visitor. But what if the sign is not a spectacular comet, but something subtler? The 1980s were a golden age for the discovery of new comets via satellite and automated telescopes, faint objects never visible to the naked eye. What if the marker is not for public panic, but for a shift in our relationship with the universe, a silent, technological witness to a plague born from our interconnected modern world? Or perhaps the comet did appear, not in the sky, but in our minds. The red ribbon, the universal symbol for AIDS awareness, is a man-made comet of sorts, a bright, looping shape that appeared in the cultural firmament precisely when it was needed, a symbol of both crisis and hope created by humanity itself. This introduces a haunting twist. Maybe the Ghost Comet was never out there at all. Maybe it has always been a reflection within us, a psychological placeholder for the awe and terror we feel when our world fractures. When a crisis is too vast, too painful to comprehend, we project it onto the heavens because the alternative, that suffering is random, meaningless, and ours alone to bear, is simply too much to hold. So, is the legend dead, killed by the quiet skies of the 1980s? Or does its very failure reveal a deeper, more human truth about why we need such stories in the first place? Comet Hale-Bopp tore across the night sky in 1997, a brilliant, icy visitor that captured the imagination of the entire planet. For over 18 months, it was a constant, dazzling presence, its twin blue and white tails sweeping across the constellations. It was the most widely observed comet of the 20th century, a shared celestial spectacle that brought people together in backyards and on hilltops, pointing upward in collective wonder. In the age of the internet, its image was everywhere, a symbol of cosmic beauty. Yet in its glorious light, a very different and darker story was unfolding, one that would redefine the Ghost Comet's influence for the modern age. While millions saw a scientific marvel, a small group in San Diego, California, saw a literal ticket to the stars. This was the Heaven's Gate cult, led by a man named Marshall Applewhite. They believed that the Earth was about to be recycled, wiped clean, and that the only path to salvation was to leave their human bodies or vessels behind. And they were convinced that a spacecraft was following directly behind Comet Hale-Bopp, coming to collect their souls and transport them to a higher level of existence. This was not a global plague or a world war. This was a crisis of belief, a tragedy born from apocalyptic thinking weaponized by a charismatic leader. The comet was no longer a passive omen for all humanity. It had become a specific, targeted signal for a select few, its meaning twisted into a narrative of escape and transcendence. In March of 1997, as the comet shone at its peak, 39 members of Heaven's Gate calmly ate a last meal, ingested a lethal mixture of phenobarbital and vodka, and laid down to die, each with a purple cloth draped over their head and shoulders. They believed they were shedding their containers to board that hidden spacecraft. The world was horrified. Here was the Ghost Comet pattern manifesting in the most intimate, terrifying way possible. It marked a crisis, but one contained within the walls of a mansion, a psychological and spiritual rupture. This event revealed a chilling evolution. In an era of mass media and growing online connectivity, the comet's power was no longer in what everyone agreed it meant, but in what a single, persuasive voice could claim it meant. The ancient, unified dread of a comet as a divine warning had fragmented into 1,000 possible interpretations, some of them lethal. Hale-Bopp was a blank screen, and onto it, a desperate group projected their final hope. This shifts the legend profoundly. The comet itself was innocent, a beautiful ball of ice. The crisis was not written in its composition, but in the human minds that interpreted its light. The danger had moved from the sky into the realm of ideology and manipulation. If the Ghost Comet returns, its greatest threat may no longer be as a harbinger of natural disaster, but as a catalyst for new and dangerous myths, amplified by the very networks that connect our global village. The heavens might be silent, but we are louder than ever, and we are still desperately trying to hear them speak. The final years of the 20th century hummed with a new kind of fear, one written not in ancient prophecies but in computer code. As the calendar prepared to flip to the year 2000, a digital ghost haunted the world's infrastructure. Programmers had, for decades, used 2 digits to represent years, like 99 for 1999. The worry was that when the clock struck midnight, systems would read 00 not as 2000, but as 1900, causing a catastrophic rollback. Planes would fall from the sky, power grids would fail, bank accounts would zero out, and society would spiral into chaos. This was the Y2K bug, a potential crisis born entirely from human oversight, a glitch in our own electronic nervous system. It was a perfect storm of millennial anxiety, a technological apocalypse waiting to happen. And as this digital countdown ticked away, a new light appeared in the night sky. In September 1999, a comet discovered by the Lincoln Near-Earth Asteroid Research Project named Comet Linear brightened unexpectedly. It became visible to the naked eye as a faint, fuzzy star, a quiet cosmic visitor arriving right on schedule for the end of an era. Here was the Ghost Comet pattern repeating, but the crisis was utterly modern. The panic was not about plague or invasion, but about the fragility of the digital world we had built. And the comet was not a dim omen from a medieval chronicle. It was discovered by an automated telescope, its orbit calculated by silicon chips. The ancient and the hyper-modern had collided. For those already prone to end times thinking, the connection was irresistible. Comet Linear's appearance in the months leading up to the millennium became fuel for 1,000 theories. Books and late-night radio shows wove it into narratives about the Book of Revelation, Nostradamus, and the Mayan calendar. The comet was seen as the heavenly sign preceding the great digital collapse, a celestial marker for humanity's hubris in thinking it could control time itself with machines. Yet, when the moment arrived, the crisis fizzled. Midnight passed and the light stayed on. The Y2K bug was largely diffused by a massive, global effort of programmers working tirelessly to patch the code. The feared collapse was averted by human ingenuity, and Comet Linear, never a spectacular sight, faded quietly from view. This moment is a fascinating pivot in the legend. For perhaps the first time, the potential crisis was entirely manufactured by our technology, and the comet's role was almost purely symbolic, amplified by a media-saturated age. It marked not a catastrophe, but the fear of one, a global psychological event. The Ghost Comet appeared not as a warning of something coming from outside, but as a mirror to the anxiety we had created for ourselves. It highlighted how our ancient instinct to look for signs in the sky had simply adapted to new fears. We were no longer afraid of the wrath of God, but of the failure of our own logic. The comet's light, in the end, illuminated nothing more than our own reflection, staring back at us from the brink of a millennium we had built and were terrified we might break. The digital anxieties of Y2K faded, but the ocean held a deeper, quieter terror. On the morning of December 26, 2004, one of the most powerful earthquakes ever recorded tore open the seafloor off the coast of Sumatra. The energy released was equivalent to 23,000 Hiroshima-type atomic bombs, lifting trillions of tons of water into a series of monstrous waves that radiated across the Indian Ocean. Within hours, coastlines in 14 countries were inundated. The tsunami killed an estimated 230,000 people, a staggering loss of life that left the global community reeling in horror and grief. It was a raw demonstration of nature's indiscriminate power, a crisis of geological scale, and in the desperate search for meaning that followed, eyes turned upward once more. Was there a sign? Official astronomical records are clear. No bright comet graced the skies in the weeks preceding the disaster. Telescopes around the world tracked nothing out of the ordinary. Yet, if you sift through the anecdotal accounts, the personal stories shared in villages and online forums in the aftermath, a different, more human record emerges. There were reports of strange lights, of unusual atmospheric glows in the nights before the quake. Some spoke of seeing a bright, stationary star that pulsed oddly. Others mentioned a faint, hazy patch in the constellation Orion. These were not professional observations, but the memories of traumatized people trying to piece together a timeline of a world that had shattered. This retrospective search for a celestial warning is a powerful psychological phenomenon. When an event is too vast, too tragic to comprehend, our minds instinctively work backwards, scanning our memories for any anomaly, any detail that could have been a clue. That odd light in the sky, which on any other night might have been dismissed as a satellite or a trick of the clouds, becomes imbued with profound significance after the fact. It becomes the omen we wish we had seen. The absence of a documented comet during the 2004 tsunami is in many ways more telling than its presence would have been. It starkly highlights the selective nature of the Ghost Comet legend. We connect the dots when they are there, and when they are not, we sometimes draw them in ourselves. The human need for a narrative, for a cause that precedes an effect, is so strong that we will populate an empty sky with portents. This disaster, perhaps more than any other in the modern era, underscores the critical flaw in seeing patterns across millennia. It reminds us that correlation is not causation. The Earth's tectonic plates shifted because of immense geological pressures that had built up over centuries, not because of a silent visitor from the outer solar system. The real story here is not about a comet that failed to appear, but about our enduring, heartbreaking need to believe that the universe gives warnings, that even in its violence it speaks to us. The silence of the heavens in December 2004 was, in its own way, the most chilling message of all, a reminder that sometimes catastrophe simply happens, and we are left alone to mourn and rebuild under a cold, indifferent sky. A different kind of tremor shook the world just a few years later, one that began not in the Earth's crust but in the ledgers of Wall Street, as the subprime mortgage bubble began its fateful wobble in early 2007. The southern skies were set ablaze. Comet McNaught, discovered just months earlier, swung past the sun and erupted into the most spectacular comet seen in over 40 years. For those below the equator, it was a sight of breathtaking, almost terrifying beauty. By day, it rivaled Venus in brightness, visible in a clear blue sky. By night, its tail stretched across 150 degrees of the heavens, a vast, ethereal fan of dust and ionized gas that seemed to hold the entire constellation of Scorpius in its shimmering grasp. It was not a faint omen, but a celestial supernova of light impossible to ignore. Here, the ancient symbolism of the comet as a portent found a powerful, modern metaphor. Comet McNaught did not merely appear in the sky, it illuminated it with a cold, brilliant fire. And in that same year, a different kind of light was about to be cast upon the intricate machinery of global finance. The comet's peak visibility in January and February of 2007 coincided with the first major cracks in the financial system. The collapse of two Bear Stearns hedge funds that summer, heavily invested in mortgage-backed securities, was the first loud warning shot. The comet's radiant tail, seen as a beautiful anomaly, became in retrospect a stark, metaphorical spotlight. Just as McNaught's incredible tail revealed the delicate structures of interplanetary dust and solar wind, the financial collapse that fully erupted in 2008 exposed the fragile, interconnected, and deeply flawed architecture of the global economy. The complex derivatives, the reckless lending, the systemic risk hidden in plain sight, all of it was suddenly illuminated by the harsh, unforgiving light of crisis. The comet's light was natural and silent, the economic crash was man-made and deafening, yet the parallel is haunting. Both events revealed hidden structures normally invisible to the naked eye. One showed the scaffolding of the solar system, the other, the scaffolding of our trust in markets. This is how the Ghost Comet archetype evolves in a digital, globalized age. We no longer see a dim star and fear a literal plague. Instead, our modern minds draw symbolic connections. A brilliant comet becomes a metaphor for exposure, for a shocking revelation that changes everything. The portent is not in the comet causing the event, but in our collective subconscious using its imagery to frame our understanding of the disaster. The sky wrote a parable in light and ice, and on the ground we lived out its theme. that sometimes the most beautiful light reveals the most dangerous flaws. It makes you wonder what other hidden structures in our world are waiting for their own illuminating event, their own comet's glare. A global crisis arrived without a sound, but with a name that echoed through every empty street. The COVID-19 pandemic was a modern ghost, a biological specter that locked down nations, filled hospitals, and isolated billions in their own homes. Fear was a tangible presence, a quiet dread that mingled with the constant news of rising case numbers and death tolls. The world was united in a shared experience of anxiety and loss, yet profoundly separated, each person staring at the same crisis from behind their own window. Then, in the deep twilight of July 2020, as the first pandemic summer wore on, a point of light emerged in the pre-dawn sky. It was Comet Neowise, discovered only months earlier by a space telescope designed to hunt for asteroids. At first a faint smudge for astronomers, it brightened as it swung around the sun, and by mid-July it burst into full view. For people across the northern hemisphere, stepping outside for a moment of air during an endless lockdown, there it was. A brilliant comet with a shimmering, split tail, visible to the naked eye, hanging in the northwest sky like a message written in ice and fire. In a time when travel was forbidden and gatherings were dangerous, the comet became a universal destination. People climbed to rooftops, drove to remote hilltops, and simply stepped into their backyards, all to look up at the same silent visitor. Photographs flooded social media, a shared gallery of awe that crossed every border and bypassed every quarantine. For the first time in living memory, a generation witnessed a truly great comet, and they did so from a planet in crisis. The psychological impact was immediate and profound. In the midst of so much fear and uncertainty, here was a moment of pure, unadulterated beauty that required no explanation, no vaccine, no political agreement. It was simply there, a gift from the depths of the solar system. For many, it felt like a cosmic bomb, a reminder that there was still wonder in a universe that felt increasingly chaotic. But for others, the ancient pattern clicked into place with an almost audible shudder. The Ghost Comet had returned. The timing was too precise, too symbolic to ignore. A brilliant, unexpected comet appearing just months into a devastating global pandemic. The legend was no longer a dusty story from history books. It was unfolding in real time on smartphone screens and in the eyes of neighbors standing 6 feet apart. This was not a coincidence you could easily dismiss. It felt destined. Comet Neowise reignited the legend because it perfectly fit the oldest template, a celestial event of stunning scale mirroring a human event of tragic scale. Yet it also transformed it. This was not a dim omen foretelling doom, but a brilliant companion during the storm. It did not cause the panic. It provided a moment of shared solace within it. The comet became a paradox, a symbol of both the ancient pattern and a new kind of hope. It proved that even when the world is fractured, the sky can still offer a point of common connection, a silent, beautiful reminder that we are all under the same stars, facing the same fears, and capable of being lifted by the same sight. The Ghost Comet legend, in the age of COVID-19, evolved from a harbinger of crisis into a fellow witness, a luminous reminder that awe and anguish can exist in the same sky, and that sometimes the light we need most appears when the world seems darkest. That shared moment of awe under Comet Neowise makes the legend feel undeniable, but a compelling story is not the same as a scientific fact. We must now turn to the cold, hard data and ask the astronomers and historians who spend their lives studying the sky and the past. Their consensus is a sobering splash of reality. The first and perhaps most powerful point they make is about simple numbers. Comets are not rare events. On average, several new comets are discovered every single year by automated surveys and dedicated amateurs. Most are faint, requiring telescopes, but they are constantly passing through our neighborhood. Truly great comets, bright enough to see easily with the naked eye and impress the general public, are less frequent, but still not the once-in-a-millennium events the legend implies. Statistically, a naked-eye comet appears every 5 to 10 years. Some are spectacular, like Hale-Bopp or McNaught, while others are modest, like Neowise. The point is, the sky is never truly empty of these visitors for very long. Now, place that astronomical frequency against the backdrop of human history. When has our species not been in some form of crisis? War, famine, political upheaval, pandemics, economic collapses. These are not rare exceptions to a peaceful norm. They are recurring features of the human story. If you have a celestial event that happens, say, once a decade, and you have a planet that experiences a major crisis somewhere on its surface at least once a decade, the odds of them overlapping by pure chance become extraordinarily high. It is a mathematical inevitability. An astronomer might frame it this way: roll a die labeled with crises every few years and roll another die for comets every few years. Eventually, you will roll a double, and when you do, our pattern-seeking brains will insist it must mean something. This leads directly to the psychological concepts that explain the legend's persistence: confirmation bias and apophenia. Confirmation bias is our tendency to search for, interpret, and remember information that confirms what we already believe. We vividly remember the comets that coincided with the Black Death or World War II. But what about the Great Comet of 1882, a stunning sight that blazed during a period of relative peace and technological optimism in the Victorian era? It is forgotten by the legend, or the brilliant comet Escalierup-Maristany in 1927, which appeared during the prosperous Roaring Twenties. It doesn't fit the pattern, so we quietly drop it from the narrative. We collect the hits and ignore the many, many misses. Apophenia is the deeper driver, the human propensity to perceive meaningful connections in random or meaningless data. It is why we see faces in clouds or hear hidden messages when a record is played backward. Our brains are exquisite pattern recognition machines, evolved to connect the rustle in the grass with a potential predator. This skill kept us alive on the savannah, but it misfires when applied to the vast, impersonal timelines of history and astronomy. We are connecting dots that are light years apart, creating a picture of intent where there is only coincidence. The historian's view adds another layer. Before global communication, a crisis was often a local or regional event. A plague in Europe, a famine in China, a war in the Americas. Chroniclers in each of those places would look to their own skies. If a comet happened to be visible there at that time, it became part of their local story. Over centuries, as these disparate records were compiled into a single global history, it created the illusion of a single comet appearing for every global crisis, when in fact different comets were being recorded by different cultures during different regional tragedies. The legend is a mosaic pieced together from fragments of human suffering and celestial observation, but it is not a unified map. So is the Ghost Comet merely a statistical phantom, a trick of the mind played across centuries. The evidence from science is overwhelmingly persuasive, yet even with this rational explanation laid bare, the legend retains a strange, haunting power. Why does this particular coincidence feel so deeply meaningful, even when we know the numbers? Perhaps the truth lies not in the orbit of comets, but in the orbit of the human heart around the unknown. So we are left with a powerful story, but a scientific impossibility. The legend demands a single, silent wanderer that returns to watch over our crises, but the clockwork of the solar system tells a different tale. Comets are governed by orbits, predictable paths shaped by the sun's gravity. Some are like local commuters on short, regular loops. Halley's Comet is the most famous of these, returning like clockwork every 76 years, a celestial pensioner we can mark on our calendars. Other short-period comets swing by every few years or decades, their visits frequent but often too faint to notice without a telescope. Then there are the long-period comets, the true voyagers. These originate from the distant, frozen Oort cloud, a spherical shell of icy debris at the very edge of the sun's influence. A passing star's gravity, or a collision far out in the dark, can nudge one of these ancient icebergs onto a plunge toward the inner solar system. Their orbits are measured not in decades but in thousands or even millions of years. When we see a comet like Hale-Bopp or Neowise, we are often witnessing its first and only visit in all of recorded human history. It swings past the sun, puts on its show, and then vanishes back into the deep freeze for an epoch. This simple orbital reality shatters the core idea of a singular ghost comet. The crises in the legend are separated by wildly different intervals, sometimes 800 years, sometimes 50, sometimes just a few. No single comet could possibly have an orbit that flexible. Its path is dictated by physics, not by the rhythms of human suffering. A comet that returned in 536 could not also return in 1347 and again in 1789 on the same orbit. The universe does not work that way, so what are we really seeing? The astronomical answer points to a simple, if less poetic, explanation. We are not seeing one comet. We are seeing many. The sky is constantly visited by different comets, each on its own independent clock. Sometimes, purely by the random roll of cosmic dice, one of these visits coincides with a period of profound human turmoil. Our pattern-seeking minds then do the rest, stitching these disparate visitors into the tapestry of a single, ominous character. The ghost comet is not an actor, but a role, a part played by different celestial objects across the centuries, each unaware it is stepping onto a stage set by our own history. This turns the legend inside out. It is not a cosmic signal, but a human projection. We are the ones connecting these dots across the void, writing the same story over and over again onto whatever bright light happens to pass by. The mystery then shifts from the heavens to our own minds. Why is this particular story so tenacious, so deeply satisfying, even when the facts argue so forcefully against it? Perhaps the most powerful force shaping this legend is not in the stars, but in the architecture of the human mind itself. Our relationship with comets stretches back to the very dawn of conscious thought, rooted in a primal mixture of terror and awe. For most of human history, these visitors were utterly inexplicable. The ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle, whose ideas dominated Western thought for nearly 2,000 years, believed comets were not celestial objects at all. He argued they were atmospheric phenomena, burning exhalations from the Earth itself, located far below the perfect, unchanging realm of the Moon. They were signs of earthly imbalance, portents written in the air we breathe, which made their connection to disasters feel terrifyingly direct. This view held sway until the 17th century, when the genius of Isaac Newton, using his new laws of motion and gravity, finally proved that comets were celestial travelers. He calculated the orbit of the comet of 1680, showing it moved in a vast, elongated ellipse around the sun, a citizen of the solar system obeying the same physical laws as the planets. Science had demystified the comet, stripping it of its supernatural aura. Yet, the ancient fear did not vanish. It merely retreated into a deeper psychological layer. This is where a compelling modern theory called terror management theory helps explain the legend's stubborn power. The theory proposes that a fundamental driver of human behavior is our awareness of our own mortality. The knowledge that we will die creates a deep-seated anxiety. To manage this terror, we construct cultural worldview systems of meaning, religion, science, and national identity that give our lives purpose and the promise of symbolic immortality. Now consider what a global crisis represents. A pandemic, a world war, a famine. These events thrust mortality into the spotlight for an entire civilization. They are collective brushes with death on a massive scale. In these moments of profound vulnerability, our need for order and meaning becomes desperate. We cannot accept that such suffering is random, meaningless chaos. Our psychological defense is to search for a pattern, a reason, a story, and what better story than one written across the heavens? The Ghost Comet legend is a perfect narrative device for terror management. It takes the terrifying randomness of a plague or a war and frames it within a cosmic order. It says this did not just happen, it was signaled. It was part of a larger, if ominous, design. Even a frightening design is psychologically preferable to no design at all, because it implies that the universe is paying attention. A silent, indifferent cosmos is far more terrifying than one that sends warnings. So we look up, and in our moment of collective fear, we connect the dots. That faint light in the sky becomes the character in the story we are writing to survive our own dread. The comet is the punctuation mark we add to history's most painful sentences, a way of insisting that even our deepest crises have a place in the grand narrative of the cosmos. We are not just victims of chance, we are witnesses to a celestial drama. This psychological need is why the legend persists long after astronomy has provided its answers. The Ghost Comet is not a celestial object, it is a mirror. It reflects our ancient, unshakable need to look into the void and see not just ice and dust, but a story about ourselves. That deep-seated need to find meaning in the wandering stars is written into the oldest stories we possess. The Ghost Comet of our modern anxieties is not a new character, but merely the latest incarnation of a human archetype so ancient it predates written history. Across the globe, in cultures that never met, people looked at those mysterious, untethered lights and saw the same terrifying shapes. To the ancient Babylonians, a comet was a celestial sword, a blade of fire drawn across the heavens as a divine warning of war or the death of a king. In China, comets were often seen as sweeping brooms, sweeping away bad fortune, or as ominous dragons whose appearance disrupted the harmonious balance of the cosmos. Norse mythology spoke of comets as the disembodied heads of giants, flaming skulls hurled across the night as portents of great bloodshed and the downfall of rulers. These were not casual observations, they were fundamental interpretations of chaos. A comet broke all the rules. The moon had its phases, the planets their steady wanderings through the constellations, but a comet arrived unannounced, changed shape, and then vanished. In a universe that many believed was ordered and purposeful, the comet was the ultimate wild card, a tear in the celestial fabric. Its very nature as an unpredictable anomaly made it the perfect vessel for humanity's deepest fears about disruption and change. Perhaps the most famous example of this archetype shaping history is the Star of Bethlehem. The Gospel of Matthew describes a star that appeared in the east and moved ahead of the Magi until it stopped over the place where the child was. For centuries, astronomers and theologians have debated what this celestial sign could have been. While a planetary conjunction is a strong candidate, one of the oldest and most persistent theories is that it was a comet. This idea is powerfully cemented in Western culture by Giotto's famous fresco in the Scrovegni Chapel, painted in the early 1300s, which depicts the nativity scene with a blazing comet, likely inspired by the artist's own sighting of Halley's comet in 1301, hanging directly over the manger. Here, the archetype is flipped. The comet becomes a harbinger of miraculous birth rather than catastrophic death, but its core function remains identical. It is a supernatural sign in the heavens, marking a moment of profound, world-altering significance. From fiery swords to guiding stars, the comet has always been a blank screen onto which we project our hopes and our terrors. The Ghost Comet legend is simply this age-old practice dressed in the language of modern crises. We have traded dragons for pandemics and disembodied heads for economic collapses, but the instinct is unchanged. When a strange light appears in the sky during a time of trouble, we are not just seeing ice and dust, we are seeing the latest chapter in a story humanity has been telling itself since we first looked up and wondered what the lights were trying to say. But this reliance on human eyes creates a modern dilemma of its own. We have built a civilization of artificial light, a perpetual twilight that washes out the stars. For billions of people, the Milky Way is a forgotten myth, and spotting a faint comet from a suburban backyard is nearly impossible. Our ancestors lived under a profound, inky blackness, their night sky a brilliant, detailed tapestry. Any new stitch, any faint smudge of light would have been immediately obvious. Today, we have traded that celestial intimacy for the glow of screens and streetlights. Could a dim, recurring comet, the true Ghost Comet, be passing by right now, utterly invisible to the vast majority of humanity? It is a haunting thought. The very technological progress that connects us globally may have severed our most ancient connection, blinding us to the subtle signals in the heavens that our forebears would have seen as clearly as a lighthouse beam. We may be living through a crisis with a celestial marker overhead, and we simply cannot look up and see it. Yet at the same moment we lost the naked eye sky, we gained a new, digital set of eyes. Professional sky surveys have revolutionized comet hunting. Projects like Pan-STARRS in Hawaii scan the heavens every night with powerful telescopes and immense cameras, automatically comparing images to find moving objects. They discover dozens of new, incredibly faint comets each year, most far too dim for any human to ever see without aid. Soon, the Vera C. Rubin Observatory will come online, its mirror scanning the entire southern sky every few nights with unprecedented depth. It will catalog billions of objects, spotting asteroids and comets by the thousands. This presents a fascinating paradox. We are detecting more comets than any civilization in history, but we are seeing them with silicon and code, not with our own awestruck gaze. This technological net is so fine it raises a tantalizing possibility. Could there be a single, faint comet on a very long orbit, one that returns every few centuries, that has been slipping through the historical records? Ancient chroniclers only wrote down the spectacular, the terrifyingly bright comets. A dim, persistent wanderer might have been noted once as a curious star, then forgotten. Its next return missed entirely because it coincided with a cloudy season or was simply too faint against a moonlit sky. Our digital surveys could, in theory, find such an object today, calculate its orbit backward through time, and discover it was indeed present during the Black Death or the Plague of Justinian, hiding in plain sight in the noise of the cosmos. This keeps the mystery alive in a thrilling, scientific way. The Ghost Comet may not be a brilliant herald, but a shy, recurring specter, its faint light only now being captured by our mechanical sentinels. The legend shifts from folklore to a genuine astronomical cold case, a puzzle waiting for the right data to snap into place. So the question is no longer just about the past, but about our present moment. Are we, right now, collecting the evidence that will prove a pattern we felt in our bones for millennia? Or will the relentless clarity of our telescopes finally show us an empty sky, leaving our stories of celestial warnings as beautiful, haunting fiction? The search itself becomes the newest chapter in this ancient human story. Philosophy offers a chilling twist on our search for patterns, one that frames our entire history as a countdown. It is called the doomsday argument, and it begins with a simple, almost playful assumption. Imagine you are a random human being, born at some unknown point in the total timeline of our species. Statistically, you are far more likely to find yourself somewhere in the middle of that timeline than at the very beginning or the very end. If you were among the very first humans, that would be a remarkable and unlikely position. If you are alive today among the billions who have ever lived, the argument suggests you are probably not at the dawn of humanity, but much closer to its twilight. This probabilistic reasoning leads to a startling conclusion. The total number of humans who will ever exist is not infinite. It is finite, and we have likely already lived through a significant portion of that number. In essence, humanity's story has more pages behind us than ahead. This is not a prophecy based on comets or climate, but a cold equation of likelihood. It suggests our civilization is statistically closer to its end than its beginning. Now, weave this idea back into the legend of the Ghost Comet. If the doomsday argument holds any weight, then every major crisis, every plague, every war, every collapse is not an isolated tragedy. It is a milestone on a finite road. The comet, in this view, takes on a new and terrifying role. It is no longer a cause or even a conscious omen. It becomes a random statistical marker, a flashbulb going off at random intervals along our journey. Because we are, by this logic, living in the later chapters, the flashes appear to cluster. We perceive them as a countdown because we are, in fact, counting down. The randomness of celestial mechanics and the statistical likelihood of our place in history create an illusion of design. Each time the comet appears, it feels like another tick of a cosmic clock because, in a sense, it is. We are the ones moving through time, approaching an unknown terminus, and we keep looking up to see the same indifferent signpost whizzing by. This layers a profound existential dread onto our mystery. The terror is no longer that the comet brings the crisis, but that both the comet and the crisis are symptoms of the same underlying condition, our position in a finite story. The universe is not sending warnings, it is simply providing random background noise. We are the ones who hear a rhythm in the static because we are listening for the end of the song. So when we look at the historical record and see that faint light alongside the fall of Rome or the horrors of the Black Death, we are not seeing a pattern in the heavens. We are seeing the shadow of probability falling across our own timeline. The Ghost Comet becomes the ultimate symbol of our own statistical insignificance, a reminder that from a cosmic perspective, every civilization has its horizon, and the lights we see in the sky are just the stars we pass on our way there. That statistical horizon forces us to look forward to the next page in our story. If the legend holds any predictive power, even as a cultural echo, the question becomes urgent. When will the Ghost Comet return, and what crisis will it mark? We can play this as a speculative game, lining up our modern existential fears against the celestial calendar. The potential candidates for a world-altering crisis are tragically not in short supply. There is the slow-moving emergency of climate change, reshaping coastlines and weather patterns. There is the opaque and accelerating intelligence of artificial intelligence, a tool of unimaginable power whose ultimate goals we cannot yet fathom. Biotechnology presents a double-edged sword, offering cures but also the potential for engineered pandemics. And of course, the original cosmic threat remains, the asteroid or comet impact, a Tunguska event that finds a city instead of a forest. Now look to the sky. Astronomers have already announced the next candidate for a naked-eye spectacle. Comet Tsuchinshin, a TLS discovered just recently, is predicted to swing past Earth in the autumn of 2024. Current projections suggest it could become quite bright, potentially visible without a telescope. Its arrival is calculated, its path plotted by the very science that demystified comets centuries ago. And so the stage is set perfectly for the next act in our ancient drama. Here is where the legend passes directly to you, the audience. The comet is scheduled. Our world faces a web of simmering tensions and clear dangers. Will the autumn of 2024 see a crisis that makes global headlines, one that future historians might point to as a turning point? Or will Comet Tsuchinshin, a TLS, pass by as a beautiful curiosity, noted by stargazers and then forgotten, finally breaking the spell of coincidence that has lasted for millennia? You are now living inside the experiment. You get to watch the data-point being recorded in real time. This is the unique weight of the mystery. It is no longer buried in chronicles. It is alive, waiting for the future to write its next line. Will you look up at that comet and see a harmless wonder, or will you feel the old, familiar chill, the sense that the universe is once again holding up a mirror to our troubled world? The answer won't be in the ice of the comet, but in the history unfolding beneath it, and in the story we choose to tell about both. From the cold twilight of 536 to the isolated balconies of 2020, the same story has been written in the sky and felt in the human heart. We have followed this thread of light through plague and revolution, famine and financial collapse, seeing it reappear with an unnerving sense of timing. But after this journey across 1,500 years, the most compelling evidence points not outward to the cosmos, but inward into the depths of our own minds. The Ghost Comet is almost certainly not a single astronomical object on a haunted orbit. It is a psychological and cultural phenomenon, one of the most enduring stories our species has ever told itself. Its power does not come from ice and dust, but from the raw human materials of fear, memory, and a desperate need for meaning in the face of chaos. When catastrophe strikes, the world ceases to make sense. The ground beneath our feet, whether literal or metaphorical, gives way. In those terrifying moments, we instinctively look up, searching the heavens for an explanation, for a sign that our suffering is part of a larger narrative, even a terrifying one. A silent, indifferent universe is far more frightening than one that sends warnings. So we connect the dots. We take a random celestial visitor, a common event in the grand scheme of the solar system, and we appoint it as the herald of our anguish. We remember the comets that coincided with disaster and forget the dozens that passed during times of peace. We weave a tapestry from selective threads, creating a pattern that feels too perfect to be chance. This legend, then, is a monument to human resilience in a unique way. It is not a story about the universe judging us, but about us refusing to be alone in the dark. It is about generations of people separated by centuries, all performing the same act of cosmic storytelling, using the same bright symbol to make the unbearable somehow comprehensible. That shared impulse, that common gaze upward in times of crisis, is the real thread connecting the Byzantine chronicler, the medieval peasant, the Londoner fleeing fire, and the person on a pandemic balcony watching comet nearwise. We are all authors of the same myth, so the next time a bright comet graces our night sky, and one surely will, you have a choice. You can look up with the old fear, scanning the headlines for a crisis it might portend. Or you can look up with a new kind of wonder, see it for what it truly is, a beautiful, natural phenomenon of ice and light, but also see it for what it has represented across the entire span of our recorded history, a blank canvas upon which humanity paints its deepest fears and highest hopes. See it as an invitation to marvel at our own incredible capacity to weave stories from starlight, to find connection across millennia, and to insist that even in our darkest hours, we are part of a continuing collective narrative. The Ghost Comet lives not in the Oort cloud, but in us, and its next chapter is yours to write. Look up, share your wonder, and tell us in the comments, what do you see when you watch the wandering star?